Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, September 3rd, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about that game that went down yesterday. Florida State falls to Boston College 28-13. Definitely a ton to unpack because Florida State has a ton of questions to get to, that is for sure. Then we'll get to the winners and losers from week one. It's officially over, and there are a number of things to talk about. Some freshman wide receivers went absolutely crazy. Not too many upsets in this week, so definitely keep your eye out on some for this weekend. But then we'll get into the top 10 teams, what they did this weekend. There were a number that just absolutely rolled over their opponent, had a number of really good things, and then there were a couple that did not do very well, and I want to break down exactly what went wrong and how we can how we should feel about Oregon and Michigan going into week two. Then we have the week one whip around. We'll continue that. We'll just go around to all the other games that I haven't had a chance to cover yet. And then we'll finish it off with a top 12 Tuesday, where I'll give you my top 12 teams in the country. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth, is to use that super chat feature at the bottom of the chat there, that little $sign. You can click on that, add any question, any comment, any criticism that you would like to bring up on the show, and it will pop up on the screen. I can absolutely get to it. Sometimes the chat goes just a little bit too fast for me to keep up with it. So if you'd like to utilize that, please do. And also the GSMCpodcast.net page is up and running if you would like to use that as well. We'll do the exact same thing. But let's jump in right here because this one was ugly. Florida State falls to Boston College 28-13. Boston College obviously covers the 16.5 point spread going into this one, and it was downright terrible from Florida State pretty much from start to finish in this one. It was bad. They did not look prepared once again. They did not look like the team that wanted it more once again, and they looked like the team that was getting bullied on the line of scrimmage once again by a team that they should not have. So a lot of things to unpack from here, but overall takeaways, more than anything, I think the biggest question to me is just what happened? I have no earthly idea how that just happened last night because Florida State got pushed around in week one by Georgia Tech. They knew that their offensive and defensive line did not play as well as they needed to. They knew that they were coming home after a long trip to Dublin. Maybe that played a factor. Maybe the travel issues and some different things got in the way of those guys being fully focused on that game last Saturday. There was no excuse for this one. You were back in Tallahassee. You had your home crowd behind you. You were playing a team that was worse than Georgia Tech is, frankly. If I had to rank these teams, I'd put them around the same area, but I give Georgia Tech the favor here, and you got taken to the woodshed. There was not a point in this game where it looked like Florida State was in control by any means. It was all over the place, and it was pretty much exactly what you saw a week ago, which makes Florida State fans, I assume, just beyond angry. And I think you look at DJ, obviously. DJ had a remarkably terrible day. He missed a number of open receivers. He missed a big touchdown that could have gotten back in the game. The only time he did throw a touchdown was Portier just going absolutely crazy and breaking a couple of tackles and getting in for a score. So he was not good. And a lot of it does fall on the offensive staff. I thought the game plan, again, was not very good. I thought they did not put him in winning situations. But at the end of the day, he missed wide open receivers. He missed ones that pretty much every single Power 4 quarterback should be able to make. So a ton of questions around him. They didn't necessarily get all they needed from the defense either. The defense in the first half was just downright bad. There were a number of plays that were pretty basic. It was just a crosser over the middle of the field, and then they would release the running back out of the backfield on the other side. It was a completion every single time. It was an absolute layup, and they got a touchdown off of it on one of the plays, which was it was insane to me how little adjustments there were throughout that first half for Florida State. And then in the second half, they settled down a little bit on defense, but it still wasn't great. It still was Thomas Castellanos essentially being able to do whatever he wanted on that football field, and that falls entirely on the coaches. I understand the players are out there and they are not playing great right now, but at the end of the day, Mike Norvell, Alex Atkins, Adam Fuller, all of those guys know what happened a week ago. They know that that was so embarrassing, that what happened against Georgia Tech a week ago, and they know that if they went back home and lost to that Boston College team, it would be that much more embarrassing. And the questions wouldn't be, what is Florida State going to be this season? It would be, what is Mike Norvell going to be as the head coach of Florida State going forward? And that's the same question that I have. I am very, very confused. What happened between them barely missing the playoff a year ago, getting snubbed in a lot of people's eyes from the playoff a year ago, and showing up this year and being just totally flat? I understand the talent is not as good. I understand they made some mistakes in the portal going out and getting DJ and doing that type of stuff. I totally get all of that. It doesn't excuse what happened. It doesn't excuse what happened in these first 2 weeks, because they are bigger, they are faster, they are stronger, they are more talented than both Boston College and Georgia Tech by a mile. But at the end of the day, huge shout out to Thomas Castellanos and this Boston College team. Huge shout out to Bill O'Brien for putting together a game plan that, while simple, it worked really, really well against this Florida State team, and kind of leaning into Thomas Castellanos' strength, which is obviously running the football. So a ton of different stuff to get to in this one, but the one thing I definitely want to jump into is just how Boston College was able to pull this off. I want to get into just where Florida State went wrong and where Boston College went really right, and the biggest one is just having Thomas Castellanos under center. He is a downright special player and one of those guys that you walk into the building with Florida State and it's not one of those games that is all that scary. Well, it's scary, obviously, but you don't have no answers. You don't have a guy that can't match up with a Florida State or a Clemson or a Miami later on in the year. So this is a very, very special player and a guy that opens so many different doors for their offense, and he did it on Saturday. I mean, 10 for 16, 106 yards passing, 2 touchdowns passing, 14 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown. He did everything that you possibly could have wanted him to do in this game and was very, very confident in an offense that is relatively new to him. Now, it was relatively similar to what they were going with a year ago, but at the end of the day, it was really impressive what he was able to do in an offense that should be a little bit tougher for him to run. I'll be totally honest. Florida State was able to get home 3 times for a sack, but more than anything, you saw Thomas Castellanos essentially just running all over the field for much of this game. But the second part of this is just Florida State's dysfunction. I have no earthly idea how they're getting to this point, but at the end of the day, DJ was downright terrible, had 50% completion percentage, less than 300 yards, a pick, a touchdown. It was the same story as last week in so many different ways. But then running the ball, you ran the ball 16 times in this game, and I understand you were playing from behind for much of this game, but you can't put your guys in that situation. You know that DJ is not the most prolific passer in the world. If he's throwing the ball 42 times a game, you're not winning many of those games. Frankly, I don't know if you're winning any of those games. So it's one of those things where I understand you're down. I understand you have to find a way back, and I understand passing the ball is obviously the way to do that, but pick your spots. Be able to run the ball just a little bit more effectively, and they didn't early on. Ran for 1.3 yards per carry 16 times in this entire game. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we talked about it. It was all over the place. There were open There were open touchdowns all over the place, and there were a number of plays that you look at them afterwards and you're thinking, pretty basic. It wasn't like it was overly complicated from Bill O'Brien. It was just a crosser and then the running back released, and it was that over and over and over again, and Florida State had absolutely no answer. So that's a coaching problem, but also that's a player problem. I'm not sure what's going on in those practices. I'm not sure how they're setting up DJ, but at the end of the day, it is not nearly good enough. I can promise you that. And then they took the crowd out of it pretty quickly. Boston College had a drive early on in this game, 14 plays, 71 yards, but 9 minutes, 18 seconds. An absolutely just grinded out, really, really tough drive, and they ended with a touchdown. Then they got a 3-and-out from Florida State, who actually only ran 3 plays the entirety of the first quarter, which was another piece of this, and then went right back down, scored another touchdown. And from that point on, the crowd was just not as into it. And it wasn't necessarily going after the crowd by any means, going after the fans, because I don't know if I would have been into it if I saw what I saw in the first quarter of this game. But at the end of the day, it was really, really a good thing for Boston College, because whenever you can pull a Florida State fan base or a Florida fan base like Miami did this past weekend out of that game, you're going to have a really good shot to win. That is the big-time equalizer that Florida State has in this, and being able to kind of take that out of the equation was absolutely huge, and those first 2 drives were huge in doing that. So Florida State did not do plenty to keep the crowd in it, that's for sure. They tried to have 2 late drives in the first half to possibly score some touchdowns. They had a chance to in a number of them, and DJ missed a guy, and they came up short on, I believe they got the ball on the 35 of Boston College. had to settle for a field goal. So it was just one of those nights. They had absolutely nothing going, and they were really all over the place in a number of different ways. So where do they go from here is the big time question. Where do they go from here? How do they bounce back? And we'll start with Boston College, because the ACC, as of right now, is in a position where if you have a win on your schedule, especially a conference win, you're in the race. There is not enough teams in this conference playing good enough football for me to knock out Boston College right now, or Georgia Tech, who just got a win against Georgia State this weekend. But overall, I mean, there's a couple of teams that have stood out. Miami, obviously. Louisville played really good football this past weekend, but NC State played bad. Virginia Tech didn't play well. SMU's looked shaky through the first couple of weeks, so there's no rhyme or reason to the ACC. There's no person that stands out among the ACC. So Boston College is in it, as far as I'm concerned. They play Duquesne next weekend, and then they have 2 tough out-of-conference games with Missouri and Michigan State. If they go 1-1 in those games, and then they beat Western Kentucky going into ACC play, I think they're in a position to make a little bit of a run. I'm not necessarily betting on Boston College to be your ACC champion or anything like that, but I thought it was really, really impressive what they did yesterday, and I thought Bill O'Brien especially was really, really good adapting to his quarterback strengths and letting him kind of be who he is. So was really impressed with what Boston College did yesterday. And then on the Florida State side, where do you go from here? Frankly, I don't know. I have no earthly idea how you bounce back from this, because this is not how they saw the season opening. This is not remotely how I saw the season opening, because early on in this season, I was saying they're making at least 9 or 10 wins in this season. I think CFP is very much in play for this team, especially the way the last season ended. You felt like they were coming back with a mission to get to that college football playoff and to leave no doubt. And now I'm having trouble finding 7 wins on this schedule. They play Memphis in a couple of weeks. They do get a bye week, so they have a little bit of time to figure out what's going on. But then you got Memphis, and I don't think that's a layup of a game anymore. I don't think that's a game that you're looking at and saying Florida State should be able to win. I think it's a relative toss-up. And frankly, if I was to pick it right this second, I'd probably go Memphis' direction. But at the end of the day, I will pick that when it comes around. But this was humiliating. There's really no other way to put it. The first 2 weeks for Florida State football were downright humiliating, coming off a year where you were inches away from going to that playoff. You were inches away, and frankly, a lot of people argue, including myself, that you probably should have gotten in. This is not the response that you want, because although it has nothing to do with what happened last year, people are going to use it as a way to inform what happened last year. So I don't know what happens from here. I think you play Memphis in a couple of weeks. Hopefully you get a win. You figure out what happens. But let's say you lose that one. Let's say they fall to Memphis in a couple of weeks and they're 0-3 to start the season, with losses to Georgia Tech, Boston College, and Memphis, where they should have been and would have thought they would have been 3-0 during those games. I think there's questions around Mike Norvell. I understand he's had an incredible couple of years, and I don't think he's all that close to getting fired by any means, but fans are getting restless. You can feel it. Florida State fans are getting very restless, and if they lose that Memphis game, there's going to be a lot of questions around Mike Norvell and the way that he's going about business, because frankly, if he wasn't as reliant on the portal, this team's probably in a little bit of a better spot, at least from a depth perspective. But all of this will obviously, work itself out throughout the season. It's looking to be a very rough season for Florida State, and we'll see what happens from here on out. But it's going to be interesting to watch, that is for sure. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the winners and losers from Week 1. A ton of different things happened this weekend, and we had some play callers do some really, really good things. We had the ACC do a lot of really bad things. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the embarrassing performance from Florida State yesterday, losing to Boston College 28-13 and starting their season 0-2 for I believe the third time since Mike Norvell has been there. So not a good start for the Seminoles by any means in a year that they very much thought they were going to go to the playoff, but let's get into some winners and losers from week one, and obviously Florida State would be a loser, but do not have them in here. A little bit more grandiose ones here, but let's get into this, and I want to start with one that was very, very fun to watch this past weekend, and it was SEC football pretty much across the board. There were a couple of stinkers. Obviously, A&M, Florida did not play the football they wanted to, but there were a lot of points. I'll tell you that. There were a lot of teams that put up just ridiculous amounts of points. Arkansas, Auburn, Texas, Ole Miss, Bama, all of them put up over 50 points, and a number of them put up over 60, and a couple of them put over 70. It was absolutely ridiculous what these people were capable of this past weekend, and if you take all of them together, just to give you an idea, we'll get into the details of some of these games a little bit later, but just to give you an idea of what went down last weekend, it was, if you take Arkansas score, Auburn, Missouri, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Kentucky, you combine them all together, I believe you're sitting at 416-3 is how much they outscored their opponents by. Outright ridiculous performance from a lot of these offenses. We'll get to the Auburn team that put up crazy stats, and particularly their freshman wide receivers, which we'll get to here in a second, but a lot of teams put on some shows in the SEC, and we had a number of others. You know, Ohio State put up crazy amounts of points, obviously a number of other teams that had a number of big-time performances on the offensive side of the ball, but the SEC really took the cake, put up just ridiculous numbers against inferior opponents, no doubt about that, but at the end of the day, still really impressive, and you saw what a lot of these quarterbacks and a lot of these offenses are capable of in the SEC this year. Moving forward to a loser, people who like upsets had a tough week. 58-2 were double-digit favorites this last weekend, and Boston College threw us a little bit of a bone last night to give us a little bit more craziness in this week, but Vandy was the only team that won as a double-digit underdog against Virginia Tech this past weekend, so a little bit weird. Now, there were some very close calls. Michigan State barely beat FAU, Northwestern barely beat Miami of Ohio. Texas Tech escaped. Abilene Christian, frankly, should have lost. South Carolina, almost the exact same thing with Old Dominion. So it was a lot of really close threats. And then you had UNLV get the upset over Houston, although that was only a 2.5 point spread by the time it came up. So I think it's going to be one of those weeks where we look back and we say, wow, that really wasn't all that crazy, but maybe it gets crazier this weekend. Maybe this week being not as chaotic, not as wild, is a precursor to this next weekend being all over the place and absolutely off the wall. So definitely, if that's the trade-off that we're making, I'm more than fine with that. Still some really great football this past weekend and some really close upsets, but nothing actually broke through except for Vandy and Boston College this past week. Moving on, another winner is teams with new play callers had a day. Whether it was the offensive or defensive play callers for these teams, you had a lot of those big-time hires from this offseason really show themselves. And the big headline was Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State did an incredible job with that offense, showed what Drew Aller can be in a explosive down-the-field offense, was really fun to watch. Bush Hamden over at Kentucky did a really good job in his first game coming over from Boise State. Chip Kelly obviously got that offense rolling. Kalen DeBoer / Nick Sheridan, not exactly sure who's calling plays out there, but down in Tuscaloosa got everything rolling. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you had a couple of big performances as well. DeAnton Lynn, Blake Baker battled it out at USC LSU, and that was a really fun matchup and one where you saw the differences in the defense. Now, those defenses still have a number of big-time holes, particularly on the back end, but I still think there were huge strides that were taken by both those defenses in this offseason, and it was obviously because of the guys that they were able to hire. Tom Allen did a great job in his first game at Penn State, and so did Elko at A&M, although they came out on the wrong side of that. So a lot of really good performances from the new coordinator hires that all across the country were huge news all offseason, and they're delivering thus far, that is for sure. A loser, absolutely a loser is the ACC. When you look at the ACC this past weekend, Miami and I guess Boston College are the only two teams that really looked all that great. I think there were a couple other teams, Louisville really delivered, Georgia Tech took care of business, SMU played better this week than they did a week ago, but I still think they have quarterback problems. Syracuse was able to get it done, so overall the conference went 12-3. It wasn't all that crazy, leaving out the Boston College Florida State game obviously, but so it was a lot of W's, not a lot of L's, but at the end of the day, Virginia Tech, North Carolina State, and UNC did not play good football this past weekend. UNC looks like a team that, if it's not going to be Omari and Hampton, they're going to have a lot of big-time problems. Virginia Tech just looks totally out of sorts, looks like they do not know what they want to do offensively. And then NC State, that defense is all over the place, and the run game is not where you want it to be. So overall, I think you look at this ACC conference, and coming out of week one at the very least, Miami looks like they are setting the pace, and they are miles ahead of people as of right now. But we'll see what happens throughout the year. Obviously, Clemson is a team that could bounce back. Don't have to play Georgia again, so that helps a little bit. But we'll see what happens in the ACC. As of right now, it is definitely the weakest of the Power 4 conferences coming out of week one. Winners are big time. Freshman wide receivers just took over this weekend. It was incredible to watch a lot of these guys go to work, and there are a number to get to, so I want to break this down real quick. Jeremiah Smith put on a show, 2 touchdowns, 92 yards for Ohio State. Ryan Williams had 2 big-time catches, one 84-yard touchdown, another touchdown in that one, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns on only 2 catches. So had himself a very nice day. Then Auburn's trio went crazy. You had Cam Coleman had 62 yards and a touchdown. Perry Thompson 82 yards and a touchdown. Malcolm Simmons 91 yards and a touchdown. They did everything you could possibly want them to do, and obviously, playing Alabama A&M lends itself to that just a little bit, but still really incredible performances from that group over there in Auburn, Alabama. Then you had Texas. Ryan Wingo led them in receiving yards in a day where they spread the ball out a ton. He made a number of really, really good plays, and I know Texas fans are very happy about him. And then you had Reese Vanderzee, made a number of big-time plays for Iowa. Was the first time I've seen an Iowa receiver do a lot of good things in a football game, if I'm being totally honest. He had 66 yards, 2 touchdowns, and this entire Iowa offense looked a lot better in the second half of that game. So definitely a lot of really impressive performances from the freshman wide receivers all over the country, and it shows you, we were talking about him coming in being one of the best groups that I've seen in quite some time. They're definitely living up to the billing, at least through week one, and I think it might just continue, especially with that guy right there, Jeremiah Smith, just downright special. He is insane, and one of those guys that, frankly, could lead Ohio State in receiving yards, and if you're a freshman leading Ohio State in receiving yards, you're an alien. It's outright insane what he's capable of doing on a football field, but awesome to watch, and cannot wait to see what these wide receivers can do throughout the season. Moving forward, if you did not like the 90s or the 2000s in college football, strap in, because it's going to be a very, very tough year for you. We saw USC get a huge win in Las Vegas over LSU and showed just how far that defense has come. Still some issues, but definitely much, much better than a year ago. Notre Dame got maybe one of the most, if not the most impressive win over there in Kyle Field, getting a top 20 win. Absolutely huge for them. And then, not to be outdone, Miami put on a show in Gainesville, and collectively, they might have brought back the late 90s, early 2000s football that a lot of people did not like. Miami was obviously very, very loud. USC was obviously the cream of the crop with Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and all of those guys, but the hype behind these teams is real. You can feel it in the college football world right now, and it was only a matter of time. Whenever USC really hit big, it was always going to be a lot of talk around those two entities. And then Notre Dame is one of those that has been on the national stage for quite some time, not necessarily like they're just now getting onto the national stage again, but they did just get a huge win, and a win that, frankly, in past years, they do not get a lot of the time. So a huge, huge thing for all of those programs, and frankly, if you put all three of those teams together, you're going to have a really, really fun year. If USC, Miami, and Notre Dame are all in the mix, along with teams like Texas and Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia, it's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to have a lot of really, really fun jersey matchups in the playoff at the end of the day. And then finally, a winner and a loser is the Big Ten. This is kind of a complicated one because the Big Ten did go 17-1 this past weekend. Absolutely no help from the Golden Gophers on Thursday. But at the end of the day, 17, huge amount of wins. Obviously, they dominated, got the number of wins that they needed to get. There were a lot of really, really rough performances. Michigan State barely escaped FAU with a really gross performance up there. Wisconsin was essentially gifted a muff punt to beat Western Michigan. Oregon really struggled, and we'll get into the details of that in the next segment. And then Michigan as well. Again, the next segment we'll get into. Northwestern barely beat Miami of Ohio. UCLA had a really rough 3-point win against Hawaii. There were a lot of really, really bad things from the Big Ten. Now, they did come out on the winning side of things, so not necessarily too much to worry about. But when you're looking back at this week, the two teams that were really impressive were USC and Penn State. Those are the teams that got those big-time wins against LSU, against West Virginia. Ohio State played good football, but it was Akron, so I'm kind of taking that a little bit out of the equation here. But overall, I think you got the wins that you needed to. You got two really big ones, obviously, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of questions about a lot of the teams in this conference, and we'll see what they can do throughout the rest of the season. Obviously, Oregon and Michigan are going to have to turn it around, because if they don't, then they might be in for a really long season and one that leaves a lot on the table. So overall, I think when you look at the winners and losers from week one, it's a little bit all over the place. Obviously, this is going to take form over the next couple of weeks, and we'll see exactly who can separate themselves. Miami is a huge winner right now. If they fall to USF in a couple of weeks, they won't be. So it'll be really interesting to see how this develops and people flip from winners to losers and back again. It obviously will go all over the place throughout this year, but let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the top 10 teams. A number of them just went to work this weekend, just took their teams to the woodshed. And then we had a couple that had some really worrisome performances, and I'll get into how worrisome they are and how long they might just follow these teams. So we'll get into that right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the winners and the losers from last week. Obviously, the freshman wide receivers really showed out, and the ACC did not. So I wanted to break that down real quick for you guys, but let's get into the top 10 teams. There were a number of big-time storylines from this past weekend around these top 10 teams, and a couple that did really, really good work this past weekend, a couple that did not. And I'll get into all of the details on that right here. So let's start with the Ohio State Buckeyes, who got a big win, 52-6 over Akron, and this was a pretty straightforward performance from Ohio State. Started a little bit slow, but had a great second half, and I think Will Howard showed that he can really run this offense. Went 17 for 28, 228 yards, 3 touchdowns, and honestly had a couple of drops in there as well. So it was really impressive. I thought did exactly what you wanted them to do. I think the quarterback run game will be a bigger part of the offense as they move forward, but relatively it was vanilla on Saturday. Just overall, I think they kept everything pretty basic and made sure that this offense moved, and it really did in that second half. So really impressive. They had 2 defensive touchdowns from Lathan Ransom and Gabe Powers and another pick from Denzel Burke. So they looked like themselves on defense, that is for sure. They looked like the team that we expected them to be, and I think they're going to continue that trend. They have quite a bit of time to figure out who they need to be before they get into Big Ten play and before they get into real big-time Big Ten play when they head out to Oregon. But overall, there's a ton of positives here. I think the quarterback run game will be utilized more going forward, but this was pretty much an autopilot blowout for this team. They did exactly what they needed to do in week 1, and although I have respect for the Zips, I don't necessarily think this was too much of a challenge for Ohio State. So we'll see what they're about in a couple of weeks here, but at the end of the day, they have quite a bit of time to figure out all of the little things they need to figure out and then hit the ground running when they hit Big Ten play. So good performance from Ohio State, not a ton of negatives to take away from it. A little bit of a slow start, which is a little bit worrisome, but other than that, an absolute dominating performance and exactly what you would expect from Ohio State. Moving on to Texas, this was really impressive to me. When I was watching this game this past weekend, I did not think that Texas was going to, first of all, shut them out. Colorado State, the amount that they throw the ball, the ability that they throw the ball with is really, really impressive, and they weren't able to do any of it. There was two Colorado State quarterbacks that played in this game, Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, the starter, and then Brousseau came in a little bit later, but they went a combined 13 for 24, 74 yards passing, 0 touchdowns, and 2 picks. It was domination from the back end of that Texas defense, and especially that play from Jahdae Barron on that pick was outright insane. It's one of the reasons that he just has to be on the field one way or the other, whether it's at corner, at nickelback, at safety. That guy has to be on the field for Texas. But overall, I think when you look at this team, there were a couple of little worries around the offensive and defensive line, a couple of runs that got a little bit too far for this team on defense, but overall, really, really impressive. Quinn Ewers had a small blip early on in this game with a pick, but overall hit every single spot he could want. Had a very cool no-look pass late on in that game to Matthew Golden, but overall, the big-time news coming out of this one was Arch Manning. I believe he got the biggest crowd pop coming off the sideline to get into that game, and played really, really well. Pass for a touchdown, pass for a touchdown on a very weird play to Silas Bolden, and then rush for a touchdown. The talent is very, very obvious, and frankly, I think if Quinn Ewers goes down again, as he did the past 2 years, I think they would feel very confident with Arch running this offense. He looked really, really good, and although it was late in the game, garbage time, he was very, very impressive. And they got plenty from the running backs. Didn't necessarily lean on them too much in this game. I think you'll see a little bit more of that running back by committee against Michigan, but everything is all systems go for Texas as they head into that Michigan game this weekend. Alabama was really impressive as well. We got to see Jalen Milroe and Kalen DeBoer's offense, and it was exactly what you would expect. It was really, really explosive. It was really impressive, and more than anything, I'm impressed with the defense. But getting to Jalen Milroe here for a second, went 7 for 9, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air, 79 yards on the ground, and 2 touchdowns. Just ridiculous performances. If he's doing that all year, this is your Heisman winner, and he's running away with it. I can promise you that. There was a ton of running in this game. 47 rushes, 18 passes for Alabama, so you can see the difference in the offense. And then you saw what Ryan Williams was able to do on those long touchdowns. Really impressive performance from the young guy. I think they're likely going to need a couple more guys to step up. I think Kendrick Law and Jeremy Bernard are going to be huge pieces for this team going forward, but overall, the guys that really, really showed out were the defense. It was incredible what they were able to do against a team that is going to throw the ball around, is going to go quick, is going to do a lot of those different things. They were able to shut them down pretty much from start to finish. Jahad Campbell was incredible throughout this game, making just about every tackle you could want, and then Kwal Rousseau was all over this team. He was in the backfield pretty much every single time, so really impressive performance from this defense. I think Kane Womack has brought over exactly what they needed. A little bit of aggression, a little bit of more blitz-heavy type defense, and it's really working, at least through game one. Obviously, a ton of big-time tests with South Florida, then Wisconsin, then obviously Georgia coming to town for Alabama, so this is definitely going to be the easier of their games this upcoming season, but a really remarkable performance, and I think exactly what Alabama fans wanted to see in Kalen DeBoer's debut. Moving on to Ole Miss, they went to work. It was absolutely incredible to watch this offense go to work this Saturday, 76-0 over Furman, and Jackson Dart was at the very center of it. And I understand it was Furman, but the stuff he did in the first half was just outright ridiculous. 22 of 27, over 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, a rush on the ground, or a touchdown on the ground, just ridiculous. And he had all 4 receivers getting involved, all guys over 40 yards, so it was incredible to watch that offense go to work. And then on the defensive side of the ball, 4 sacks, 16 tackles for loss. They did exactly what they wanted to do with Chris Paul Jr., Cam Franklin, and Chris Hardy getting really in on the action. So it was really impressive. Overall, this team looked the part. They looked exactly how you wanted them to look in that first game. And then obviously it kicks up from here. Things get a lot more real, and a lot more hype goes into this team that already had insane amounts going into the season. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, they have a couple of games to get ready before SEC play, but as of right now, everything looks really, really good for this Rebels team. But moving on to the teams that gave us a little bit of something to worry about, and I'll start with the Oregon Ducks. This one was really weird. If you look at the box score for this one, you would think that Oregon won by 28, 35 points, because they had really good days all around. Dylan Gabriel had almost 400 yards passing, went 41 for 49, which is another problem we'll get to here in a second. But in this game, Oregon had a missed field goal, a fumble, and 2 turnovers on downs. Now, some of that stuff is not going to happen too often. Some of that stuff could happen very often. That missed field goal could be a sign of what's to come. The turnover on downs likely aren't going to happen against a team that's not named Idaho, because you likely are not going to go for it in those situations against a team not named Idaho. So I'm not overly worried about that part of it. The thing I am worried about is this offensive line. The injury to Matthew Bedford was huge for this team. Idaho had 3 sacks in this game. That should never happen, just plain and simple. Bo Nix was sacked 6 times all of last year, so it is entirely different on this offensive line and does not look the part as of right now, and I think it's going to be a minute until Matthew Bedford gets back. Not exactly sure when that's going to be, but they got to figure that out one way or the other, because they could not run the ball in this game. Went for 2.9 yards per carry, threw the ball 49 times, and that's why. They had no running game to speak of, and overall, I'm not all that worried about Oregon. I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be able to play much better football going forward, and hopefully that offensive line figures itself out. But as of right now, they don't look all that explosive on offense because Dylan Gabriel doesn't have the biggest arm in the world, and he did hit a helmet early on in this game, so maybe that's something to watch as they move forward. But they got Boise State coming to town, and as we saw this past weekend, they can score with you. So if they are not able to put up the points that they need to, if they're not able to run the ball the way that they need to this upcoming weekend, that one could get a little bit closer than we're expecting. So Oregon, a lot of hype going into this season. I still tend to believe they are one of the top teams in the country, but this was a really worrying performance and a number of things that aren't necessarily going to be fixed just overnight. But moving on, Michigan also had a very rough performance this past weekend. This one was ugly at times for Michigan. The passing game was not necessarily where you want it to be as of right now, and it was Davis Warren who ended up getting the start at quarterback, but it was not clean. 15 for 25, 118 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 INT, and the biggest difference is when they targeted Colston Loveland, they were very successful. When they didn't, they were not at all. Colston Loveland, they went 8 for 9 when passing to him, 87 yards and a touchdown. When not, it was 7 for 16 passing, 31 yards and an INT. So that's the offense. If that's going to be the offense going forward, you're going to be able to key in on that guy in particular, put a safety over top, have a linebacker trail him, and you're not going to be able to get the ball to him, plain and simple. So if that's the plan going into this Texas game, if they have no other wide receivers show up in that Texas game, then they're in a lot of trouble. Now, there's a number of things that can be fixed throughout the next couple of weeks, and they have a big one that might not give them a ton of chances to fix it, but overall, they got to figure out a number of different things. The defense played their part. They did exactly what you expect them to do, but at the end of the day, the run game was not good at all. Donovan Edwards had 27 rushing yards on 11 carries. It was just all over the place, and they have a number of issues that they have to figure out. The quarterback, if he is not going to be totally on target every single time, they have to find difference makers on the outside, and they have not found them yet. So as of right now, going into this weekend, Michigan has a number of issues that if Texas can't exploit them, then it's going to get ugly in a hurry. So we'll figure out what happens with Michigan going forward, but as of right now, this offense looks very, very clunky. The defense doesn't look quite as dominant as they did a year ago, and maybe most importantly, this offensive line looks like they took the step back that a lot of us were expecting them to take. So they're going into a huge game this weekend against Texas, and it could get ugly if they do not have these things figured out for Michigan. But moving on to Florida State, this one was bad. We talked about it earlier in the show, so I won't waste too much time here, but I don't know how this happened. I don't know how you had what happened in week 1 happen and then walk out on the field, on your own field, and get dominated this way. It was ugly from start to finish. DJ was all over the place. The offensive and defensive game plans were downright terrible. Boston College wasn't even being really all that dynamic on offense and was still really capable of doing everything they wanted to do. They got outrushed by 242 yards. It was domination all over the place for Boston College, and it just shouldn't have been, especially after what happened last week and a year ago to Florida State. It's remarkable what this team has done the first couple of weeks, and not in the good way. I don't know where they go from here. I don't know how they bounce back. They keep moving forward, I guess, but maybe it's Brock Glenn out there the next time they take the field against Memphis, and maybe they lose that game. So it's going to get really interesting around Florida State and a couple of teams that just had really, really bad performances. Oregon, I'm a little bit less worried about than Michigan and Florida State, obviously, than Florida State. But at the end of the day, all of those have big-time worry spots where if you get to an Ohio State game or Michigan, they have one this weekend. If they get to those games not being fully prepared and not fixing some of those issues, they might just get dominated, and it could take them out of that real running to win their conference, to do the things that they want to do. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch that over the next couple of weeks, but some really rough performances from Oregon, Michigan, and Florida State this past weekend. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a week one whip around. We did this yesterday, but I want to continue today. We have a number of different things I want to update you guys on, and a number of just ridiculous performances from this past week that I want to get on y'all's radar. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different things going on with the top 10 teams in the country, a couple of really, really dominating performances, a couple of not so great performances this past weekend, so definitely a lot for them to figure out. But let's get into a week one whip around. There is a number of different things I want to get to, and let's go ahead and jump in because there is just so many games. I apologize, my hair's a little bit all over the place here, but let's get into the Tennessee game that stole a lot of headlines this past weekend where you probably didn't expect them to, and it was because of Nico Iamaleava. He was downright magical in this game, and obviously it is UT Chattanooga. I'm not going to put too much energy into this one, but everything was there. Everything was absolutely perfect from this kid throughout this game, and it's hard if you're a Tennessee fan to not come out of this one thinking you have the guy, because he went to work, 22 of 28, 314 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and if you look at a couple of those throws that he made, they are NFL-level throws. It is outright ridiculous what this kid can do with the football, and while it is UT Chattanooga, this weekend he might just show you guys that he can do it against just about any defense in the country against NC State. So really impressive performance from him. Dylan Sampson was as impressive, 12 carries, 124 yards, 3 touchdowns, and then Dante Thornton was a huge piece of this offense, had 105 yards, 2 touchdowns in this game, so did exactly what they wanted to do, and now it's on to NC State and Charlotte, and we'll see if they can prove a point in that game and continue this really, really good run they started on. Moving on to Oklahoma State, this was a really impressive performance. This is the best FCS team in the country, and by a pretty good margin. South Dakota State is a really, really good team, has the Heisman of the FCS from a year ago in Matt Gronowski, and a very, very good team, and Oklahoma State just kind of took it to him. Was really, really impressive throughout this entire thing. Alan Bowman had a great day, 25 for 34, 267 yards, 3 touchdowns, and most importantly, 0 picks, which has been a big-time problem for him. If he cleans that up throughout the season, they're going to have a really, really nice season. And then Ollie Gordon, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, essentially just a day at the office for Ollie Gordon. So really impressive performance from Oklahoma State. I thought one of the more under-the-radar impressive performances this past weekend, and now it's time for them to really get to work and get into the meat of this schedule that they very well could go 11-1, 10-2, maybe even 12-0, and find themselves into the Big 12 championship. But moving forward to another Big 12 contender, Kansas State did really, really good work this past weekend. Obviously, UT Martin is a team that they should take advantage of, but they were able to in a lot of different ways. Avery Johnson had a very nice game. Passing the ball was left a little bit to be desired. 14 for 21, 150 or so yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. So was not perfect by any means, but did the job. But I want to talk about this rushing offense. Had 31 carries, 283 yards, and 2 touchdowns between the group of DJ Giddens, Avery Johnson, and Dylan Edwards. they're going to be ridiculous throughout this year, and that's going to be the big-time part of this offense. So would love to see more from that pass game, no doubt about it, but definitely really impressive performance, and we'll see what they have against Tulane. Maybe they ride that run game to another win. Maybe the pass game comes back to bite them, but definitely one that I'll be tuning into. I can promise you that. Moving on to Nebraska, it was all about Dylan Raiola on Saturday. Everyone was talking about how incredible this kid is, how confident he looked, and man, when you watch it back, it's really obvious. It's not necessarily like he did anything overly incredible, 19 for 27, over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, but the kid just plays with a confidence that most freshmen in the country don't, and frankly shouldn't. It's actually incredible what he was capable of doing. Found Isaiah Nayer on a beautiful ball downfield who had 6 catches, 121 yards, and that touchdown, and then found Jamal Banks for another touchdown. So he's getting into the groove. He's finding the guys that he needs to find, the really veteran, long receivers that are very talented on this team, and it's one of those things that you're walking into that Colorado game, you have to feel really confident, and this performance did a really, really good job of getting that up for him. So very impressive from the freshman, and I think when you're walking into that Colorado game, you got to feel really good about number 15 if you're a Nebraska fan. Moving on to Auburn, we talked about this earlier. They went to work on Alabama A&M 73-3, and this one was about as good as Auburn fans could have possibly hoped in this one. You know, you knew you were going to see a win. You knew you were likely going to see a lot of points, but you got everything from Cam Coleman, from Perry Thompson, and from Malcolm Simmons, the 3 freshmen. 7 catches between them, over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. Just ridiculous from that freshman group. And then Keandre Lambert-Smith had 3 catches, 80 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So they did plenty with the new additions to that wide receiver room. Really, really impressive stuff from that group. And then both quarterbacks looked good. Peyton Thorne and Hank Brown, they are supposed to look good against Alabama A&M. I will give you that. But you definitely want to see more from Peyton Thorne this year. And you feel like he's definitely taken a little bit of a stride. He looked really confident on Saturday and definitely has more receivers to throw to. That is definitely the case. So we'll see what happens throughout the next couple of weeks with Auburn, but off to about as good of a start as you could possibly hope. Moving on to Georgia Tech, this was a really impressive performance, and obviously 35-12 doesn't look all that impressive, but coming off that game in Dublin, where you beat a Florida State team that you were not supposed to beat, had all this energy, all this hype, and then you come back home and you play a good Georgia State team. Not a great Georgia State team by any means, but definitely a team that could cause some problems for some Power 4 teams out there because they are so good on the Group of 5 level, but Georgia Tech took care of business. Haynes King had one of his picks that he's likely to have pretty much every game this season, but went 24 for 29, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and Malik Rutherford is really becoming the go-to target over there, along with Eric Singleton, 7 catches, 131 yards, and a touchdown. This was really impressive, and Georgia Tech obviously had to win this one, no doubt about that, but now you're heading into a Syracuse game where if you get a win there, you're 2-0 in ACC play, you're 3-0 overall, and you're feeling very confident with VMI coming up the next week. So we could see a little bit of a run from Georgia Tech, but they would have to beat this team right here. That was really impressive this past weekend. Syracuse gets a win over Ohio 38-22, and obviously the defense you would have loved to see play a little bit better in this one if you're Syracuse, but a good way for Fran Brown to start his debut, and definitely got a lot from Kyle McCord, which he said he was going to send something to Ryan Day because he got Kyle McCord in the portal. So definitely a really good performance from him. 27 of 39, over 350 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 pick. They had 3 receivers over 70 yards in this game, with Gadsden obviously leading the way with over 100 yards and a score. So really impressive. Overall, this is a very solid Ohio team on the other side, and Fran Brown being able to do this in his first game is very, very big. You know, it puts them on a really good track, and now you got a Georgia Tech game that could set you up for a ton of success this upcoming season if you can get a win at home. So a lot of really interesting things, and really impressive just overall getting a win against an Ohio team that is a little bit of a pest, would definitely cause you some problems and cause plenty of teams around the country problems, but Syracuse was able to take care of business, and now it's into the meat of the schedule with Georgia Tech coming up this weekend. Then we had Arizona and New Mexico put on a show late on Saturday night because this one was weird. It was top to bottom really weird. New Mexico was able to hang around for just long enough to make this one interesting, but then Arizona was able to pull away, and they did a number of really good things in this game. The two transfer running backs they brought over, Conley and Croskett Merritt, had 23 carries, 196 yards, and 4 touchdowns, so did exactly what you wanted to do if you're Arizona. But the guy that really stole the show was Tatori McMillan. He was downright special. 10 catches, over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, which was a program record, and frankly, the yards probably was a program record as well, but he was just incredible. Every time he got the ball in his hands, you felt like it was going to the house, and a lot of times it did. It was really impressive, and he's one of those guys. He's one of the top wide receivers in the country. I'd probably put him at number 2 right now, and he got off to about as good of a start as you possibly could have if you're a Tatori McMillan. On the other side, Devon Dampier is someone we got to talk about more often. He was really impressive in this game, went 24 for 42, had almost over 400 yards total, had 5 total touchdowns, did have 2 picks, but if you want to watch really fun football, go over watch New Mexico and Devon Dampier and just watch him go to work, because he's one of the most athletic quarterbacks in the country and really does incredible stuff. Obviously, for this Arizona team, you want to see more from this defense, no doubt about it, but the offense did exactly what they needed to, picked up where they left off from a year ago, and we'll see what they can do going forward. Gonna need more from that defense, but have a couple of weeks to figure out some things before they get into Big 12 play. The last one game I want to talk about is Boise State over Georgia Southern, 56-45. This is one that likely should not have been this close. The Boise State defense has a ton to figure out before they play Oregon this upcoming weekend, but the guy that stole the show was the best running back in the country, according to a lot of people. Ashton Jeanty, 20 carries, 267 yards, 6 touchdowns in this game. It was insane, and he was fighting cramps throughout this one, but was able to battle through, made every single play you could possibly want him to make, and this is one of those players that is an equalizer. We talked about Thomas Castellanos against Florida State. Ashton Jeanty against Oregon is one of those where if he gets going, if he starts to run and gets a little bit of open field, it's going to be hard to stop him. It's going to be one of those players that can totally change the complexion of a game and make this a lot closer than Oregon wants it. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, Oregon is going to do everything they can to stop this guy, but so was Georgia Southern. They were nowhere close. Obviously, Oregon a lot better than Georgia Southern, but Boise State might just have the best player on the field on Saturday. So a ton going in the direction, and just a ridiculous performance from Ashton Jeanty on Saturday. But overall, there were a ton of really ridiculous performances, a ton of really close games, but that'll about do it for the Week 1 recap over the past couple of days. It's been a lot of stuff to get through because Week 1 was off the walls. It was absolutely crazy, but Week 2 is pretty much here. So I want to get into my top 12 teams as we head into Week 2 on the last segment here, and we will get into that right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We did a little bit of a Week 1 whip around, officially finished all of the games that I want to touch on from this past weekend because there were a ton that I wanted to get to, but let's get into my top 12 teams. We are through Week 1, everything is set after Week 1, and we're heading into a big time Week 2. Obviously, we have Texas, Michigan, we have Tennessee, North Carolina State, we have a ton of big time games this upcoming weekend, so let's give you an idea of where I have everyone sitting as we head into it. And the first one actually, we're going to start from the bottom, so the first one might come as a surprise to some people out there, but I was very close to putting them in the first time around, and what I saw this past weekend makes me feel very confident putting them in now. I have USC at 12. I do think the performance that they put up on Sunday was really impressive. This defense obviously still has big-time holes. The back end is not quite where you want it to be by any means, but they don't have to be great. I talked about it all offseason. They just have to take a very small step forward, and then Miller Moss and this offense can do just incredible things. And we saw it on Sunday, and we'll probably see it a lot more throughout this season. So it really just comes down to that defense taking that little step forward and continuing to do it throughout the year. Getting a little bit better from last week to this upcoming week, and then continuing forward, and then just let your offense work. As long as your offense is on the field, you're having a very nice day as a USC fan. So I was really impressed. I think they're a very dangerous team in the Big Ten, and I slotted them in there at my number 12 spot. Tennessee, I have at number 11, and I understand some people think people are overreacting to that UT Chattanooga game, and I fully understand that. It was UT Chattanooga. I'm not arguing that, but I was very, very close to putting this team in already going into the season, and they really impressed me on Saturday. Obviously, Nico was the center of that, was just downright magical, did everything that you possibly wanted him to do, but that defense was super stifling, and it was one of those things that you saw exactly what everyone else saw throughout the offseason, and I think this is a team that can make some noise in the SEC. Obviously, so much ahead of them, including this upcoming week against NC State, but this is the hot team on the block, and they feel very, very confident as they head on throughout the rest of this schedule. Number 10, I do have Michigan. I still think they're a top 10 team. I did drop them a little bit, but didn't want them necessarily falling off a cliff because I know what this team is going to be. I know they're going to be a defensive-led team. I know they're going to be a run-led team. Now, the run game was not nearly as good as it should be on Saturday, but at the end of the day, I still think this is a very good team. I still think they're going to be able to gut out a lot of these games. They have a huge one this weekend, and we'll see what they can do against Texas. There are some people that are saying Texas is going to take them to the woodshed. I don't necessarily fall into that group, but we'll see what my pick is later on this week. But it is a lot going on around Michigan, and as of right now, it feels like this team is slipping just a little bit. I still have them as a top 10 team, still think they're very dangerous as we head throughout the season, but was not a good week one performance and not one that feels like you can fix it all that quickly. So definitely some worry out there, but moving on to number 9, it's Miami. I understand that this was a big-time jump for this team. They're a top 10 team. They played just absolutely incredible in Gainesville this past Saturday, and it was one of those things where it wasn't just, that they were bigger, faster, stronger, and tougher than Florida, which in a lot of cases they were, but they had way more poise. Cam Ward walked down to that field, and you would have thought his heart rate was just as comfortable as ever. He was incredible throughout that game and made throws that frankly, no one on earth should be able to make. So, really impressive performance, and as of right now, they look like the team that might just run away with the ACC and head on to the college football playoff. Obviously, Clemson still has plenty to say about that, but as of right now, Miami is the team in the ACC. Oregon, I'm dropping all the way down to 8, and that is a big-time drop. I understand that, but there are a couple of big-time things in that game that made me very, very worried. The O-line looked really worrisome, and if you get into a Michigan game or an Ohio State game with that level of O-line play, you're going to get eaten up. There's no two ways about it. And then having Dylan Gabriel pass the ball 49 times in this game, way too much. I understand the running game was not going well, and I understand that Dylan Gabriel had a little bit of an injury early on in this game that might have affected him going forward, but if you're not going to be able to stretch the field passing the ball, and if you're going to pass the ball that often, teams are going to have every ability to just sit behind everything, tackle, and then just end up at the end of the day being able to beat you because your offense does not have the explosivity that it had a year ago. So I still think Oregon's a great team. They could bounce right back up with a big-time win over Boise State this weekend, but as of right now, this does not look like the team that we talked about all offseason. Penn State, I have at number 7, one of the other remarkable performances from this past week. Penn State, everyone says, all they the only thing that they're missing is what everyone says. The only thing that they're missing is beating Ohio State and Michigan. The only thing that they have to do is beat those two teams, and then they're over the hump. at the end of the day, these are the games that Penn State would struggle with. Even a year ago, that West Virginia game, although the scoreboard says that Penn State won by quite a bit, that was a close game deep into that one. Penn State has struggled with Illinois. They've struggled with Indiana. They've struggled with these teams that, frankly, they just shouldn't. And on Saturday, they showed that they're not going to struggle with a lot of these teams this year. So it was really impressive to me, and I think they're one of those teams that could continue up this board if they keep showing what they showed on Saturday. Notre Dame, I have at number 6. Hard to not reward what we saw in College Station this past weekend. Still have some worries about that offense, but I think Mike Denbrock will be able to get it going and get Riley Leonard in the positions that he's supposed to be in and get this really the running offense going a little bit more as that offensive line comes along. So was really impressed with what they were able to do. I think the offense still has a ways to go. That defense is just outright ridiculous, and I think from pretty much every single level is just about as good as you're going to find around the country. So really impressive performance this past weekend, and I think when you look at Notre Dame right now, they might just be in the playoff right now. Looking at the schedule they have ahead, you might just want to pen them into the playoff and see what happens after that. But a really impressive performance and did exactly what Marcus Freeman wanted to do to start this season. Ole Miss, I have at number 5. I think this is a really, really talented team. Obviously did what they needed to do against Furman this past weekend, and it was a layup of a game, no doubt about that, but they did look remarkably clean. It looked like everything was exactly the way that it should be, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which had me a little bit more worried than the offense, obviously. So it's going to be interesting to see this team develop over the next couple of weeks, but as of right now, they look like the team that came in with all of that hype. They look like the team that could possibly win a national title and be a danger in the SEC. So really, really impressive performance. And although it was Furman, a lot of things were in place for that Ole Miss team that you were a little bit worried about going into the season. So really impressive, and I have them slotted in at my number 5 position. Alabama at number 4. I do think what we saw from Alabama this past weekend was really awesome. I think when you're coming in with a new head coach, Nick Saban walking out the door, so many different players leaving, all the different changes going on around there, it would have been pretty easy for this game to be close at halftime. It would have been pretty easy for this game to be a little bit more sketchy than people wanted it to be for Alabama, but that didn't happen. Even from the jump, Alabama was all over Western Kentucky and played all the football that you wanted to play. The defense was really remarkable. Honestly, that was probably the more impressive part of the ball, or side of the ball to me, was just incredible what that pass rush was able to do against Western Kentucky. So they have a couple of big-time games coming up. You have South Florida this weekend. They have Wisconsin, I believe weekend after that. Maybe there's a bye in between there. But then they have that Georgia game. If they can figure out a way to go into that Georgia game undefeated and feel really confident in themselves, then that one gets really interesting in Tuscaloosa, and I cannot wait for it. But as of right now, I have Alabama at my number 4 spot, and I think they might just be able to climb a little bit more, honestly. Texas, I do have at number 3. Was really, really impressive on Saturday. I think everyone that was watching that game, it just looked like this team was fully on time, fully in place, did exactly what they wanted to do pretty much every step of the way in this game. It felt like everything was exactly how they wanted it to go about, and a couple issues on the line of scrimmage, but other than that, it was downright perfect. Quinn Ewers was as confident as you could possibly be. Isaiah Bond made a couple of huge plays along with Matthew Golden, so those transfer receivers are all making big-time plays. In fact, all 3 of them got into the end zone on Saturday, and then the pass defense was just really remarkable. I know it is Colorado State, but they can toss the ball around, so being able to play really good pass defense, 2 picks, under 100 yards passing for Colorado State in this game. If you can do that against Colorado State, at the very least, you're going to be able to hang around with some of the big-time teams. And then you have Ohio State at number 2. I think this is one of the, didn't have necessarily the cleanest of performances, at least in the first half, but were able to turn it on, did exactly what they had to do, and got a big-time win. And then Will Howard looked very comfortable in this offense. There were a couple of missed spots, there were a couple of little ers and ahs that he's going to have to get a little bit better in, but overall, they feel really, really good. And it'll stay relatively vanilla on the offensive side of the ball until they get into Big Ten play, and it'll be fun to see what his progression is throughout that these next couple of weeks. But the defense was as dominant as you could possibly imagine they would be, and I don't expect that to stop anytime soon, and they did exactly what they wanted to do. So I'm not moving Ohio State from that spot. And then this one was a layup. Georgia absolutely went to work on Clemson, and this is the best team in the country. They were incredible on Saturday, and it was one of those things that getting closer and closer to this game, you felt like Clemson might just have a shot to make some noise, might just have a shot to cause some problems for Georgia. it wasn't that. And obviously the first half was a little bit slow, 6-0 at halftime, but coming out of halftime, it was all Georgia. It was domination from start to finish, and Carson Beck leads this team with so much confidence. They have more weapons than they have had in the past couple of years, and the defense is playing a little bit closer to that 2021-22 type defense. I don't think they'll be that level, but I do think they'll be plenty good on that back end, especially with Malachi Starks back there. You're going to be able to make plays. I can promise you that. So really impressive. This is the best team in the country. The juice that they have, the confidence they have, and the amount of times they show up to a game where it looks like something really sketchy could happen and they just bury that team into the ground is just incredible. Whether it was Tennessee a couple of years ago or Kentucky last year or this game, this team is just outright ridiculous. And Kirby Smart has his guys ready to go every single Saturday, and I don't think it's stopping anytime soon. I'll be totally honest with you. So really impressive performances from a number of teams. I had Oregon and Michigan dropping just a little bit. Was a little bit worried about a number of the things I saw in those games. And then Alabama I thought was really impressive. Texas I thought was really impressive. Georgia out of these teams I think might have been the most impressive. Just taking Clemson to the woodshed, and we'll figure out how good Clemson is throughout this year, but I tend to believe they're going to be a pretty solid team, and that game is going to be really, really impressive towards the end of the year. But obviously, this season is going to get a lot crazier from here. We are through week 1. We'll do a couple of questions about week 1 tomorrow, I believe, but overall, we are through week 1. We are on to week 2, and we're fully underway now. So strap in. Things are about to get really, really crazy and really weird, and I'll keep you updated as we go. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So if you're not just a college football person like myself, you can go over to GSMC and we have you totally covered around every single sport you could want. So definitely check that out. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow for some week 2 breakdowns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.